Today we're going to be speaking about dietary needs at the Pesach Seder. That is to say that at the Pesach Seder we're required to eat many different foods in considerable amounts as well. Excuse me, and that potentially raises health and safety issues for people at the Seder, different kinds of challenges. And so today we're going to speak about what there is to do and what a person is required to do. This presentation is prepared together with Mrs. Hannah Shore, who's an RDN, a dietitian nutritionist, and Rabbi Chaim Sender, who's Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Monmouth Medical Center in Lakewood. And I'm going to speak about different issues that there are. But of course, when a person has one of these serious issues to consider, they should not make changes in what they do without first speaking to their rabbi and the dietitian, the RDN or doctor, in order to make sure that everything they're doing is proper from the side of halacha and as well from their medical needs as well. Okay, now when we go to the Seder, at the Seder, there are 6 different types of food times that we're going to be required to eat foods at the Seder, and they are we have to drink 4 cups of wine. Or grape juice or wine. We'll speak about that in a minute, what those are. We have to drink matzah 3 times. We have to eat marror twice. At one point we eat Charoses. We have Karpas. And there's a festive meal later on in the Seder. Now, just before we actually get started on the details of those things, it is always, it is always a good idea for a person to, for all people, or in particular somebody who has dietary needs, to make sure that they eat well before Pesach, on Erev Pesach, so that they take care of themselves nutritionally as well. Now, the first thing is like this. For the first three items that were listed, I'm sorry that I can't change my screen here. The first 3 items that were listed there, the wine, the matzah, and the marror, there's specific amounts that a person has to eat, a shiur, a certain amount that a person has to eat. And in that regard, there are 3 basic opinions about the Shiurim. And the first is the most lenient is associated with Rav Chaim Na, who lived in the earlier 1900s. He wrote extensively about this topic. Around the same time, there was someone else, the Chazon Ish, who argued that the Shiurim are much larger. The amounts one is required are much larger. And then lastly, there was the opinion of David Feinstein, who by and large followed the same halachic principles as the Chazon Ish did. He sort of agreed with him on many on the halachic issues, but between his shittas of those and his mix with his father's and Igros Moshe, he came up with numbers that tended to be someplace in between Rav Chaim and the Chazon Ish. Again, even though from the halachic aspects, he favored the Chazon Ish's approach. In practice, his Shiurim tended to be more in the middle. Many American poskim, including Rav Schwartz, follow the opinions of Rav David Feinstein, and that's what we're going to. When I speak, I'm going to mention those opinions as the opinions that we're going to be following. Where possible, I'll put on the screen, or you can read the written version of this presentation, and you can see there the other shiurim that there would be. Okay, and now it is worth bearing in mind that when a person has medical needs or has some kind of allergies or other things we're going to talk about, reasons why they can't eat certain foods, then it is worth sometimes, in speaking to the rabbi will tell them that they could be satisfied by following a smaller share of Rav Chaim Na at different purposes, and that therefore it's worth bearing that in mind. Okay, now, at 4 times in the Seder, we have to drink a cup of yayin. Now, the word yayin loosely translated as wine, but really the din is that grape juice is also technically considered to be yayin as well. For all dinim, that's considered as well. But there are those who hold that there's a preference that even though grape juice qualifies as yayin, even so, there's a preference that at the Seder, specifically, someone should use wine as their, so to speak, yayin, rather than using grape juice. Okay, so now, but if there's a medical reason for a person to avoid having alcohol, as we'll mention some in a minute, then they should speak to the rabbi which is more important, is the preference of having wine, or is their medical need and how strong that need is, and therefore avoid. Now, how much wine or grape juice is a person supposed to have? So, Rav David Feinstein says that the shear is the cup. The cup has to hold. I'm not yet up to how much you should drink of it, but the cup has to hold 2.9 ounces. It has to hold a revius, and but it's worth. The cup has to have that much wine in. Has to have that much wine in it, or grape juice. However, the cup does not have to be filled with grape juice. It has to be full, but a person is allowed to dilute that grape juice or wine with water. It's a question in the poskim about how much water you're allowed to put in, but many hold that you could put as much as 50% water into that. So, of course, if the people who bottle the wine or grape juice add their own water, then they've already used up some of that amount, so to speak, that you're allowed to put in. But it's something worth bearing in mind. You have to talk to the company or the hashgacha to find out how much water do they add, if any. But if a person can add water, it means to say is that it has the potential of having less actual wine or grape juice since they're diluting it with water. I'll mention also when the Seder is on Friday night, which is not this year, but when the Seder is on Friday night, then the first cup has a stricter rule, and it would have to have about 4.5 ounces, 4.4 ounces, in order to be qualified. Now, the most Kiddush cups most Kosos bechers that people would use hold well more than 2.9 ounces. And as we're going to talk in a second, the person, again, there are lots of people who want to drink less than they have to. We're going to talk in a minute how much you have to drink. It is worthwhile to try to get a smaller cup, and you can look for what's called a sauce cup. And you can find ones that are 3 ounces, measure them, and make sure that they actually are 3 ounces. In which case, and it's perfectly fine for the mitzvah, and that would have less wine or juice in it. Now, there's different opinions as to. I told you the cup has to hold 2.9 ounces, but there's different opinions as to how much of that cup do you have to drink. Shulchan Oreich means different opinions. One opinion is that says that a person has to drink roiv of the kos, most of the cup. So it means if the cup holds 5 ounces, you have to drink a little more than 2.5 ounces. As much as the cup holds, you have to drink most of the cup. Another opinion is that a person should drink roiv revius. That their obligation is just to drink roiv revius, most of a revius. A revius is 2.9 ounces, so a person would have to drink 1.5 ounces. And then another opinion, a most strict opinion, is that he should drink a full revius, which is a full 2.9 ounces. So the Magen Avraham comes up with this idea, and he says, listen, get yourself a smaller cup, and therefore, if you get a smaller cup that holds exactly revius, like I mentioned, the sauce cup that holds just 3 ounces, then a person can end up drinking either most of the cup and most of the revius, which is going to be the same amount. He could even drink a full revius. It's just about 3 ounces worth of drinking is not so much to drink, and therefore the Magen Avraham brings that as an idea, as a way to get to accomplish more of these opinions without having to drink too much, which again some people find difficult. So if we put these different pieces of information together, we come out with that a person is supposed to be. The cup has to only hold 2.9 ounces. That 2.9 ounces could be watered down to a certain extent, and a person can only. It's according to many, he can drink just most of the revius, or most of the cup. He could end up drinking maybe just 1 ounce worth of actual wine or grape juice, which is significant for some people who have difficulties. Like for example, there are people who have to limit the amount of liquid they drink altogether. People who are on dialysis, or edema, or gastric sleeve. So those people want to limit how much they drink altogether. And so those people can use the smaller cups and the smaller amounts within the amount that they're supposed to drink. Now, there are some people whose condition is so serious that they should drink, that they'll talk to the rabbi, and the rabbi will say, under your circumstances, you should be not even drinking all 4 cups. You should drink only 1 cup. So in that, if the person will be drinking less than all 4 cups, again, under rabbinic direction, then if he drinks just 1 cup, it would be the cup of Kiddush. If he has 2 cups, it would be the first cup and the third cup. The third cup is after benching. And if you're drinking 3, it should be the first, the second, and the third. Okay. Now, there are patients who have dysphagia, and they're not able to drink regular beverages without thickening them first. That they won't be able to drink just the regular juices that other people can drink, and they should use. There's in the thicknesses that they have. There's different measurements. Nectar thick or a honey thick. Those are still considered liquids, but they should not be drinking one that's in a pudding thickness. That's too thick to be considered a liquid, and that's not suitable for drinking the Kosos. Now, if you can buy one already thickened, that would be great. If not, a person could add their own thickener that's kosher Pesach, or that's suitable for that person. That's also okay. If not, if they can't thicken themselves, and they can't buy pre-thickened, then grape juice, then there is another beverage that qualifies as Chamar Medina. Chamar Medina means if a person doesn't have wine or for some reason can't drink wine or grape juice, then they can drink Chamar Medina. And Rav Moshe says what that means is Chamar Medina means something that people would drink if they were not thirsty. They just enjoy drinking it as a beverage. And between the items that are possible, that are available as thickening and that are kosher Pesach, apple juice is something that would be qualified. So a person could use thickened apple juice, again, that's either nectar thick or honey thick for the Kosos. Okay, now, there are many people who need to limit the amount of carbs that they have. For example, people who are diabetic or a ketogenic diets to avoid the seizures. So those kind of people would want to limit the amount of carbs that they have. So here on the screen you can see that regular grape juice has about a little less than 4 grams of carbs per ounce, while the light grape juices have only 1.5 grams per ounce. So that might be a good choice for someone like that. Excuse me. Okay, now for some people who are diabetic are not able to drink wine because it causes their blood sugar to lower, or it might be incompatible with medicines that they take. Other people avoid alcohol because they're a recovering alcoholic or they have a liver disease, and those kind of people potentially would have a preference to use grape juice. Other people have general restrictions, I mentioned before, and restrictions on how much liquid they're allowed to drink. So again, they should speak with the rabbi of how to minimize, as I mentioned, some ideas of how to minimize it, and then even possibly not even drinking all the 4 Kosos altogether. Now, we've now finished with the Kosos. Now we move on to Matzah. That there are 3 times at the Seder that we eat Matzah. Motzi Matzah, that's the first time, then Koreich, and the sandwich, and Afikoyim at the end of the meal. The Mitzvah D'Oraisa, according to the Torah, a person is obligated to eat 1 kazayas worth of matzah at the Seder. But in fact, because of different drabanans and minhagim, we actually eat much more than that. We eat 2 kazesim at Motzi Matzah, 1 kazayas at Koreich, and 2 kazesim at Afikoyim. So that's quite a lot. It turns out to be 5 kazesim. So how much matzah actually is that? So really, the size of the matzah that a person has to eat is how much a person has to eat is a certain volume of matzah. So for an average matzah, at Motzi Matzah, a person would have to eat a piece which is 7.5 inches by 6 inches. At Koreich, only 3.5 inches by 6 inches. And Afikoyim, 6.5 inches by 6 inches. Those are for average size matzahs. On the screen, there's all kinds of other sizes for thin matzahs and thick matzahs. Again, for thin matzahs, you have to eat a bigger piece because you're not getting as much in each piece, and for thick matzah, a little less. Of course, all this I'm talking about is using handmade shmur matzah, this is what an average, typical person is supposed to be using at the Seder. People who are not allowed to eat as much for some medical reasons why they should speak to a rabbi beforehand, who might advise them to eat less. For example, they might tell them to follow the Shiurim of Rabbi from Chaim Na, whose Shiurim tend to be smaller. They're not smaller. I'm looking at my screen right now. They might tell him to follow a different shiur. They might tell them to eat only 1 kazayas at each point. They might give them other directions. And there are times when a person is so restricted how much they can eat, either physically or or medically, how much they can eat, that the rabbi will tell them they should eat just 1 kazayas of matzah. And if that's true, if that's the decision the rabbi makes, person should only eat 1 kazayas of matzah, what they should do is they should not eat at Moitzi Matzah, they should not eat at Afikar, and they should not eat at Karech. Rather, they should only eat at the end of the meal. They should, when they finish the Shulchan Oreich, they should wash, recite Hamoitzi and Achilas Matzah, and eat one kazayis, which is Afikarman, and Moitzi Matzah at the same time. That's how they will fulfill the mitzvah by just eating one matzah. Of course, that would be, since it's Afikarman, they wouldn't be allowed to eat afterwards. Other times, a rabbi would tell them just to eat Moitzi Matzah and Afikarman and skip Karech. But again, that needs rabbinic direction based on the person's very specific needs. Otherwise, most people are going to be eating five kezesim with a matzah. Okay, now there are people who have to limit, as we mentioned before, and people have to limit their carbs. They're diabetic or ketogenic diet, and they need to limit the amount of matzah that they eat. The amount of carbs that they eat. So there's quite a lot of carbs in the matzah that I mentioned before. According to Shiurim, it will be at the 3 times 28 grams, 12 grams, and then 24 grams of Afikarman. So quite a lot of carbs that a person would have. Now there are people who have to eat, who are on low fiber diets, like if a person has Crohn's or IBS or a colostomy. So those people would want to eat matzah made from white flour, as opposed to other people, the opposite, who specifically do need fiber, would want to have whole wheat matzah. Okay, now the Ramah has a minhag that a person should, at the Seder, should eat matzah made from wheat. That's a preference. It's understood that means that's a preference because that's a finer matzah. It tastes better, or it's a more higher quality matzah to eat matzah made from wheat. But if a person has an allergy or some other special preference why they don't want to eat matzah made from wheat, then that's fine. They can eat matzah made from spelt or rye. And again, of course, matzah has to be made from one of the 5 primary grains, so they can eat spelt or rye. Then there are people who are celiac or have other reasons why they're not allowed to eat gluten. They can't eat matzah made from wheat, rye, or spelt, and those people would have to eat oat matzah. Oat matzah is made specially for Pesach, which is to say oats that are gluten-free oats, special for Pesach. Those matzahs tend to be much thicker than the other matzahs, in which case the so to speak size that they have to eat is smaller than the shiurim I mentioned beforehand. Now there are some people who are celiac who are not even allowed to eat oats either, or just starting on a gluten-free diet, not supposed to eat oats. Those people should consult with their rabbi and their doctor or the dietitian in order to determine whether exactly how much they should eat, or if they should eat it, and which thing overrides the other. Okay, a matzah is made from flour and water, from one of the 5 grains and water, and that's it. Just flour and water in it. People who are Sephardic are allowed to eat egg matzahs during Pesach. However, even they are not allowed to eat egg matzah at the Seder, to be to the mitzvah at the Seder, and they would have to eat regular matzah like I guess everybody else does. Okay, now there are people who can't chew. People who can't chew or swallow as well as everybody else can. A person again who has dysphagia or severe gum disease or TMJ, or is on an altered consistency diet, meaning they need to eat only pureed foods, and those people can't eat or chew matzah. For those people, there are several choices of what they can do, and I'm going to mention them in order of from best to worst. Okay, the best before we got to this part was to eat matzah just plain, like just eat from a piece of matzah. But if a person can't eat or chew regular matzah, then I'm going to mention the choices again. The best ones first, and as we go down in more and more b'diavad, I mean less of a first choice. Okay, the first is they can eat crushed up or ground matzah. Okay, that's simple enough. For some people, that'll do the trick. Other people can only eat matzah if they soak it in warm water. I mean, ambient temperature or warm water. They shouldn't do it for very long. Leave it in there just for a little bit, so the pieces that come out are still the size of a kazayas, and that the water, the way the Marror talks about, the water doesn't become clouded from the matzah, sort of, getting absorbed into the water. Okay, choice 3 is they could soak the person would soak the matzah in hot water, not in a kli rishon, in a kli sheni, meaning a pot that, not from the fire. Take water out of the kettle into a bowl or something else, and soak the matzah into there. Fourth choice is they could dip it into a warm beverage like soup or juice, which is not just water, but it's a warm beverage. And bottom and worst, least desirable choice is to soak it in a warm beverage, not just dip it in the warm beverage, but actually soak it into in a warm beverage in order to soften it and make that the person should be able to eat it. Okay, now the related to this is that some people I mentioned who can't chew or swallow as well, but related is that the mitzvah of eating matzah has to be done within a certain amount of time, called kadei achilas pras. And there's different shiurim given for that, somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes. And there are people who can't get it down that quickly. So some people who have difficulty with swallowing, or some of the issues that I mentioned a few minutes ago, such as a person with a stomach sleeve or a stomach band or dysphagia, who can't get it down that quickly, should talk about whether they should follow a longer share of Kedei Achilas Pras. Again, I mentioned this year that that most people follow, or maybe they should just do the rushing for the Mighty Matzah and let the other ones slide. The other ones do not as quickly. That's a discussion someone should have with their rabbi. Okay, we now move on to Marror. We eat Marror twice at Seder, Marror and a Koreich. Both of those are D'Rabbanan nowadays. And the Mishnah tells us that there are 5 vegetables that are suitable to use for Marror. It's questionable what all 5 of those are. Most people therefore eat either romaine lettuce or ground horseradish. There are some people who have a family custom that they eat endives that they consider to be good enough. Again, but most people do use romaine lettuce or ground horseradish. How much Marror do they have to eat? Regardless of which form of Marror a person uses, it's the same amount. According to Rav Feinstein, the amount they have to eat from Marror, it's going to be an amount that fits into a container. So I'm going to tell you the container size in a second. It fits into a container, meaning you squish all the leaves together without any ear space in them, and whatever fits into there, that is a kazayah. So according to Rav Feinstein, for Marror, the shear is what would fit into a 1 ounce glass, and like a 1 ounce shot glass. And for koreich, it's what fits into a glass that holds 0.7 ounces, so about 3/4 of an ounce. What it is take all that lettuce and squish it together without any ear space into it, and it fits into that container. That's considered to be the shear kazayis. It's not a tremendous amount. Now, there are some people who need to be on a low fiber diet. We mentioned some of them before, and the person has Crohn's or IBS or a small bowel obstruction, SBO, or colostomy. So those people need to find out whether this 1 ounce shot glass full of lettuce or ground horseradish is going to cause them difficulty with their condition that they have. And if the dietitian says yes, that would be a concern for them, then they need to speak to a rabbi about what they should do and which maror they should eat or how much they should eat, what they should do. You can't use cooked vegetables, so they should talk about what they can do. Okay, as I mentioned by matzah, it has to be in this short amount of time, called kadei achilas pras, 2 to 5 minutes. So again, the same thing. If a person has difficulty getting it down, that will have a difficulty getting down in such a short amount of time, like they have dysphagia. Again, they should speak to their rabbi about what they should do. If a person realizes that they will not be able to do the mitzvah of maror for one of the reasons that I mentioned, they can't eat that much or they can't eat that quickly, etc., then the din is that a person should eat some piece of maror, just have a taste of it, not make the bracha of achilas maror, but at least a certain taste of it. It's not, they're not doing the mitzvah, but it's a somewhat of a reminder to the person of the bitterness, the mariros, the bitterness that the Jews suffered when they were in Mitzrayim. Okay, we now move on to the last few things that I mentioned, the last 3 things that we eat at the Seder. The first is Charoses, and that is at the very beginning. I'm sorry, when we eat maror, we dip maror into Charoses. The Gemara doesn't tell you very much about what you should make Charoses made out of. The Gemara really just says that it needs to have a thick consistency, and it reminds us of the cement that the Jews used when they were working in Egypt. So the Rishonim give all kinds of ideas of vegetables that are appropriate to you. The Rambam says like this: it should have apples and pomegranates, figs, walnuts, and almonds, and then you grind all those things up into a thick, like mortar, like a cement, and that's good for maror. And then he says, then there's a minhag to add broken cinnamon sticks and grand strands of ginger because they look like straw that would be used in cement. And then the Rama says, also right before you eat it, you should put in some wine or wine vinegar, so that liquid, which is not getting absorbed, again, it's just this thick consistency, and you add this liquid very at the end, will remind the person of the blood of Jews that was spilled during this time when Yidden were in Mitzrayim. So all of those items that I just mentioned are all not from the Gemara. Those are all later minhagim or ideas of what it should be made out of. And therefore, if a person has a specific allergy, I'd say, for example, there's a common allergy to nuts, then the person should leave that out. Or the person can't drink wine or can't tolerate wine or vinegar, then they should make, in these cases, the person should make the Charoses without that ingredient. Again, the Ramah brings all these kind of foods that should be added into them, but if a person can't eat one of those for any reason, then they should just leave it out. Okay, our next food is Karpas. At the beginning of the Seder, we eat a piece of a vegetable. It's called Karpas. At the Seder, we refer to that as Karpas, but that's really not from the Gemara. It's what Rishonim, I'm not sure if it's Rishonim, in later, early Achronim call that they used to use a vegetable called Karpas, which is celery. That's what they used to use, but really you can use any vegetable. It's a vegetable that needs to be one that you make hadama on it, and it's something that's not good for maror. Besides that, any vegetable is good. So if a person has a family minhag to use a certain vegetable and they're allergic to that, or some reason they can't eat it, then they can't chew it, they have some kind of other reason why they shouldn't have it, they should pick some other vegetable. It doesn't make a difference, again, as long as it's hadama, and as long as it's not something that's good for maror, then that's perfectly fine. Not only is there no mitzvah to eat a kazayas of this, but there's actually a person is supposed to not eat it, specifically not eat kazayas, eat a very small amount. Excuse me. And therefore, a person, most people can tolerate nibbling on something, even a small piece, and pick, again, just about every vegetable is good enough to be used for karpas. Now, the karpas is dipped into something before you eat it. The common custom is that we dip our karpas into salt water, but there are people who are not allowed to eat salt water. Some, let's say, for example, people with hypertension, and some of those people might want to avoid even the tiniest amount of extra salt in their diets. And so the truth is, your person does not need to use salt water. Shulchan Oreich says that a person could use wine or vinegar or salt water. So if I'm a person, again, the common custom is to use salt water, but if a person has a reason why for them salt water is not a good choice, then wine or vinegar are perfectly fine for this dipping as well. Last thing we're going to talk about is the Shulchan Oreich. That we eat this large meal, a meal at the end, at the recital of most of the Haggadah, we eat a meal. And the beginning of that meal, there's a custom to eat hard-boiled eggs dipped into salt water to remind us that we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash we would bring a carbon Pesach, which will be eaten at the Seder. So a person who's allergic to eggs should skip that minhag. He should not eat the eggs. And again, the person who has hypertension or some other reason wants to avoid salt should eat the eggs without the salt water. One of the halachas of the Seder is that we don't eat meat or chicken that was broiled. That is because the Karban Pesach specifically has to be broiled, and therefore we avoid eating any food that someone might be confused and think that we're eating in Karban Pesach. But you are allowed to eat food that was broiled and then cooked afterwards. So there are some people who are on a low sodium diet, well, again, like people with hypertension, who will not eat meat that's kashered in the typical manner that you buy in the supermarket, which is kashered with salt. Those people would kasher their own meat by broiling it. Okay, they don't salt it. Now, no one should try this at home without special directions. But yes, there is such a thing as broiling meat as a way to make it kosher, to remove the blood without salting it. Sort of like you might be familiar with how people broil liver. So if a person does that, then that meat cannot be eaten at the Seder as is. They can cook it in water afterwards. If they broil it to get the blood out, and then they cook it in water afterwards, then they can use it at the Seder. Okay, at the end of the Shulchan Oreich, a person has to eat afikarmen, 2 kazesim of matzah for afikarmen, and drink then 1 cup of wine right after the Suda, after Shulchan Oreich, and 1 cup at the very end of the Seder. So there's a lot to eat even after the meal, after Shulchan Oreich is over. So the Ramah says a person should be careful that when they're eating at the meal, they should think about eating a smaller amounts in order to make sure they're going to be able to do the mitzvahs of Afikomen and the last two Kosos without overstuffing themselves. So the Ramah says this for everybody, but he doesn't say for people who have special dietary needs. But it's worth bearing in mind for many other people who have to think about people who have specific dietary needs. And again, for everybody, the Ramah says it for that there's a mitzvah to have eat certain foods and have Sudas on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but a person should do that in ways that are still consistent with maintaining our overall health.